platforms. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, CEO. I'm going to allow members of the media to ask questions. I'm going to take 2 batches of questions of clarity or anything that needs a further explanation. The floor is open for anyone who needs to ask questions or confirm certain things. There's a mic next to you. Just press that goes green so we can hear you. Thank you so much. All right, better, yeah.
How many voting stations are there throughout the country to get the number? And are voting stations going to be open overseas?
Okay. Okay, Tabo?
Thanks very much. Tausha Mashal from RTV. You have mentioned that there are about 2.8 million voters outstanding in terms of addresses. I just wanted to find out, have you been able to zoom into which areas specifically are problematic? And if so, why is it that in your analysis that that information hasn't come through? And secondly, what do you attribute the lack of enthusiasm to in terms of people presenting their details? Thank you.
Yeah, yeah. Right, let's answer these questions. CEO, VC.
Let me deal with the last question in terms of level of enthusiasm. As indicated in the report, of the total the total just over 25 million people who are registered. We only have, we have the outstanding addresses for about 2.8 million people. Now, it's a major achievement compared to where we were when we started. So I think people have really been responding to our call to participate in this particular process. But of course, as you would imagine, some people, once they are registered, they think that there is no need for them to go back to the voting stations to go and register. So I don't think there is apathy. I think to a large extent there is a positive response to our campaign. We are left with about 2.8 people for whom we do not have addresses. And then we're hoping that with this process, we are actually going to be able to capture as many people as possible. In terms of which areas, I think the CEO can deal with that aspect.
The distribution of the 2.8 million is uneven across the country. Firstly, in terms of provinces, we have the Western Cape having the biggest proportion of addresses compared to all other provinces in the country. And we find that the provinces of Gauteng and KwaZulu-Natal, which have a high incidence of registration and also a high population figures, those are the most affected by the lack of addresses. But even then, when you zoom further down, you'll realize that within municipalities, informal settlements are the worst affected, and the reasons are quite obvious for that. That they are informal, and by their very nature, they're not going to have easy address systems. You know, there are some conventions and innovations that people use to try to address themselves, but those are not formal and present a lot of challenges. That's one of the phenomenon. So basically what I'm saying is that even within a municipal entity, there's uneven distribution of the availability of addresses. Secondly, the rural areas also have a high incidence of persons without addresses. And the reasons for that is that they historically have not been formalized. And as a result, there are no commonly used addresses within within traditional communities. So that's the problems that we have. We have 22,612 voting stations across the country, which will be operational, all be operational on the weekend. As regards registration overseas, we are not going to open at the embassies on this weekend. However, we've commenced discussions with the Department of International Relations and Cooperation to discuss modalities for registering South Africans who are ordinarily resident outside of the Republic. And announcements in that regard will be made once those discussions are concluded.
Any more questions? I don't see hands up. Perhaps on that note, let us share with you the TV commercial that will be going live on the address harvest, so that as part of your work, you are able to assist in ensuring that the message reaches as many South Africans as possible. Jimmy, if you can just share with members of the media the TV commercial that is currently will be flighting in our country.
Away South African! The voters' roll needs to be updated with your correct address details. Why? Why? Because you need to vote where you live.
And the IEC needs to know where that is.
Even if it's an informal address, it doesn't matter. A voter's roll without complete addresses is a risk to free, fair, and credible elections.
You see how important this is?
You see, we all...
No, the real one will have
I
audio.
know, CEO, you see how important this is. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, on to Miss Note, to Miss our engineer this morning. Ladies and gentlemen, especially...
There's a question.
Yeah.
Question here.
Is there a question? Find that.
Sorry, maybe
Introduce yourself, Konje Happy. Ijarin Chapel. Okay, Maliti, thanks.
maybe I missed it because I was running in the same tab.
Okay.
With regard to informal settlement, what did the IEC decide what to do around this issue?
A question of clarity on informal
On
settlements.
informal settlement, because we don't have formal addresses.
Yes.
And, informal settlements are erupting every day all over the country.
Yes.
Linda from IEC, if I may ask you. I don't know how relevant is this. America has been complaining that they've been what they call the foreign interference in their elections. How secure is South African process of election? Should South Africans be concerned?
Okay.
Right?
Right.
Okay. I think we've covered the two questions.
I will deal with the
Come,
first
Sisi.
one, then we'll deal with the first one.
That's fine.
Nia Lindiki from Eyewitness News. I understand from the Concord ruling that the voters' roll has to be updated by June 2018. Do you think, I know it's difficult to project how it's going to turn out, you're just starting with the campaign, but do you feel that you're on the right track and that you will be able to make that deadline? It's now 2 years that you've been struggling with it. Will you make that deadline?
Thank you very much. Let me respond to, firstly, the last question. We are confident that we'll be able to reach our target of ensuring that every person who is on the voters' roll does have an address. But as we indicated earlier on, the fact that a person does not have an address does not actually invalidate that registration. So we will continue with whatever we have at that stage, having analyzed the voters' roll, and then we'll deal with whatever elements that may still be there, which may still be outstanding by the time we go to the voters, to the Constitutional Court. But we are confident from our side that the mechanism that we have put in place are yielding results. It is clear from what we have given you that from the number that we had almost 16 million people for whom we did not have addresses by the time we started with this process. Now we are left with about 2.8 million people. Clearly, there's been significant progress, and our partners, yourselves as media, have been playing a positive role in terms of ensuring that we get as many people as possible, updating their details. So we are not entirely worried about it. We believe that this campaign is going to be able to assist us in terms of ensuring that we are able to reach out to those 2.8 million people. The question relating to foreign interference, I think it is clear from what we have been saying that even though we've got a technological mechanism that we are putting in place in order to facilitate the process of the elections, the issue of voting in South Africa, as well as counting, is still manual. So we count at the voting stations, you vote at a voting station, it is manual, and then therefore elements of actually interference with the results, it's very, very minimal. And then also what happens is that information that actually gets transmitted, you can be able to compare that information because the actual result slip is scanned, and then you can actually be able to compare the results captured together with the result slip from each and every voting station. This is not only information available to us as the Electoral Commission, but it's also available to the public and members of the media. You can be able to go into the system, you will be able to get that information. So we are not worried at all about possibilities of our system being interfered with at all when it comes to the elections. We know that our systems are, we have put in place proper systems, and the transparency that we have in our systems makes it almost impossible for any person to be able to interfere with those systems, because they are largely manual in any case.
Yes, with respect to informal settlements, we've made provision for what we call the collection of sufficient particulars. In other words, a descriptor of where you live, which in terms of the Concord decision of December 2015 is competent enough for purposes of the voters' roll. In other words, we have a form that we give people who don't have addresses, and then they describe on the form the precise point where they live. And our understanding is that that is sufficient for purposes of placing a person in the correct voting district segment, and it does meet the legal test.
Thank you so much. Does not look like we've got any other handouts sending. On that note, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for coming this morning. We'll share all the information as much as possible on our normal email, and also we'll schedule interviews just to make sure that as many South Africans as possible hear that voting stations will open and they'll provide addresses to the Electoral Commission. It is a very, very serious matter. Thank you so much.
Except that so I've checked most of you, you've
Yeah.
not gone
Yeah,
online,
exactly.
and you do have access to
Yeah.
internet, that I know.
So, I've not seen it. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, thank you. I have not.
No, thanks.
About SABC, but the languages of Japan.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Or about the languages.
Maluti, you want languages there? Yeah, talk to her. Go there.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, that's it. Not later.